No.
So your dad was making Templeton Rye in the heyday of Templeton Rye in the 30s. When Prohibition ended, they tore the still apart.
Oh yeah, they got rid of that.
Probably after he got in trouble a couple times.
Anything that looked like a copper boiler or anything.
I think that's when he really started scaling up.
Really?
Well, because don't you say that business never got better than after your dad got caught because people knew where to get it?
It worked both
You
ways.
told me.
It worked both ways.
So what do you think made him eventually stop doing it? What do you think made him hang it up for a while?
It's high price whiskey.
All the legal stuff came
It's
back.
it's higher price. You could buy it when they open up liquor stores. Everybody got a liquor permit, and it's a liquor book they called it. So they couldn't make any money by it.
Finally, there was no incentive, so he just
There's
backed
no
away.
reason to make whiskey.
I think, is it fair to say during Prohibition, people had no problem paying the extra money for Templeton Rye because the alternative was so unknown. It could have been very dangerous.
Yeah.
When the legal booze came back, even though it might not have been very good, they at least had some comfort that, they weren't going to go blind.
Yeah. And purities and everything. There had to be some rugged whiskey out there.
So there was a day eventually where you said, "Dad, teach me about making whiskey." Tell me about that.
5:30 in the morning. We had it already the night before. Had the mash, big copper boiler, oversized copper boiler, like a laundry tub. And the way they seal them, we didn't seal it with solder. We used bread dough and went around it outside. And then that eventually would seal, and then when you get your mash so hot, what's the other one?
Distill.
The distilled whiskey would go down the pipe. You had to have your barrel of water there, and your hot stuff would go on down. By the time it come out, it'd be cold. White lightning. That's what you have now. Going on a much better deal. Then you had this. He taught me with wooden or electric stove. And Dad said, "Oh, is that simple now to set the stove where you want it?" You always had wood or cobs or something, up and down, and then the water.
Yeah.
You had to know what you were doing. And that's why if you got a gallon, it was a lot.
Right.
I think you
That
got
was survival.
and to note it was all done at night. A lot of it was done at night.
Yeah, you had to be the right night. And
Would it be full moon so you could see?
that was probably all right.
So
They never talked about that. They just talked about
when you eventually went to your dad and said, "Teach me how to make whiskey," was he suspicious, or what did he say?
he helped me all the way.
He said,
We
"Absolutely."
got the barrels from Baumgart's toward the end. They never sawed them up, but then they got smart. They sawed them all in half.
So this would have been the first time you did. Would have been after the war, after you came back here, after
Oh
you started.
yeah, after high school.
Early 60s, or
Yeah, after high school.
well, even after Korea, right? Or would it have been
Oh
before
yeah,
that?
after Korea.
And you just
Keith,
sort
do
of.
you remember when you first found out?
Yeah, I do. I remember you waking me up in the morning. And he made the comment, he said, there was like 5 kingpins around Templeton making whiskey, but
So-
your grandpa's the only one that stuck the money in land, and others were gamblers. And,
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting. So it would have been Joe Earlbeck, Al Kirchhoff. You know the other
well,
3?
Steve, probably Frank Stevens, and
So Frank Stevens is on our plat map.
see.
He owned a lot of land.
We got a tape. I got to show you that tape of grandmother, but she mentions Frank Stevens. See,
Yeah.
first she denied it,
And Frank Halbert.
and Frank Halver. She didn't mention Frank Halver. She mentioned Frank Stevens. Frank Stevens is the one that got busted.
Yeah.
So I think
The guy that Gus always mentions is Ray Bristol. Does that name ring a bell?
Well, I got a couple of things I want to mention here, Jason. Number one, when we had the Quaz Qui, we had a small part of our distillery here, but we were actually had like 900 gallons of mash going so people could actually view the fermentation process. And one of the gentlemen who I knew was an heir of Joe Earlbeck came up to me and he walked up to me and he says, "Keith, tell me a little bit about this." And I says, "What do you mean?" I said, "You know all about this." And he says, "No." He says, "I really didn't." He said, "I distilled whiskey with Joe Earlbeck one time, then he passed on." He says, "I never really got all the particulars and stuff." And he elaborated a little bit, and he said, he says, "Keith," he says, "there was probably 5 or 6 people around here that were the big people that were the bootleggers and making the hooch, and he said a lot of them guys were, they get their money, they'd be the wealthiest people in Carroll County, and the next day they'd be completely broke because they were gamblers. And he says, of all them people, he says, your grandfather was probably the only one that stuck money and saved it and stuck it in land. And he says he actually profited from
It's
the
interesting.
process.
Easy money. Easy
Well,
money
I don't know.
easily lost.
I wouldn't call it. Yeah, gambling.
Risk.
But I tell you what, they worked, to work the night operation and make, and then to control the heat and do it with coal and be close to a creek. That had to be time consuming.